President Trump has been doing a lot of bragging about the job numbers. Hey, look, we've got a low unemployment rate, 3.94%. And yes, it is historically low. Congratulations. Now, in reality, of course, it's been declining for quite some time. In fact, we've had 93 to 94, I believe, solid months of job growth. Now, that means, of course, it extends all the way back into the Obama presidency. Now, one, of course, problem with that is that even under Obama, we had stagnant wages. Wage growth was not keeping up with inflation, and that is still true under President Trump. Now, here's the thing, right? So, look, I've talked about how the unemployment rate doesn't tell the whole story, and I was saying that even during the Obama administration, when Obama was touting the job numbers. For one, the unemployment rate doesn't include people who are underemployed, nor does it include the types of jobs that were created and how much they actually pay. So, if you have a good job numbers, but all those jobs are basically minimum wage, service sector, fast food jobs, well, then that's not really an accurate count of the economy, right? Now, what's different about this is that, yes, we had those numbers under Obama. Then again, Obama had a Congress since 2010 that didn't allow him to do anything to help stimulate the economy. They couldn't pass a minimum wage increase, which, of course, Barack Obama said, okay, let's go to $10 an hour. Okay, now let's go to $12 an hour. And the Republicans wouldn't let him do anything like that. So that's some context there, and that's to be fair to President Obama, who I don't think, when he had the ability to do more, didn't. So he chose not to. Now, the difference is here with Trump is that Donald Trump just passed a gigantic tax cut bill, which, of course, is costing us $1.9 trillion, in which 83% went to the very wealthy. But he promised it, no, this is a middle-class tax cut, which is, again, incorrect. 83% went to the rich, as I just mentioned. But this will help raise your wages. Not only will it create jobs, you'll actually get more money, too. You'll save money in your paycheck, which is effectively a wage gain, which actually technically is not, because they're not actually paying you anymore. But it's going to help all that stuff. It's going to make the economy tremendous and fantastic. Now, did that happen? No. I think it's fairly obvious that it did not happen. But Pew Research did a study on it anyway. Just to add to the plethora of other studies that have shown that we have had no wage growth, even after the promise of gigantic tax cuts. Now, the details of this are actually pretty stark. Now, according to that study by Pew Research, the real average wage, which Pew defines as the wage after accounting for inflation, has now roughly the same purchasing power as it did 40 years ago. Well, that's disastrous. While it's noted in the report that some workers have seen gains, most of the increases have gone to those who were already the highest paid. So, just like the tax cuts, you had the majority of the benefit going to a very few amount of people. The people who actually don't need it, and skipping the people that actually need it the most. Now, here's more details, courtesy of the Bureau of Labor Statistics. They found that average hourly wages for non-management private sector workers were about equal to $22.65 in July. That is up 2.7% from a year earlier. Now, inflation, as I mentioned before in other segments, is up 2.8%, so that basically wipes out any wage gains. It has been eaten by inflation. Now, that is actually in line with general patterns over the past 5 years, when wage growth has been between 2% and 3% annually. Now, again, I mentioned that happened during the Obama administration, and as Obama, when he had power, didn't really do anything to address it, and then post-2010, where even if you wanted to do something to address it, Congress would not allow him to do so because they were controlled by Republicans. You had a Republican House for quite some time, which would not take up any bills on addressing income inequality or, raising the minimum wage. So, again, I got to give important context to these facts. Now, despite this growth, is despite Trump's tax cuts and the tariffs that were supposed to help American workers, but in fact, they have done little to help American workers. And in fact, the tariffs themselves are actually poised to hurt American workers. Now, on wages, let me give you some stats on that. In the 1970s and early 1980s, when inflation was high, average wages actually jumped way more. They jumped 7, 8, or even 9% year over year. So that's 1970s, 1980s. Yes, high inflation, but wages actually outpaced inflation, which is not what we see now. In fact, according to Pew's Drew DeSilver, after adjusting for inflation, today's average hourly wage has just about the same purchasing power it did in 1978, following a long slide in the 1980s and early 1990s and bumpy, inconsistent growth since then. In fact, in real terms, average hourly earnings peaked more than 45 years ago. 45 years. I haven't been alive for 45 years. So in my entire lifetime, I have not seen high wages. We as a nation, working people, have not seen high wages. It peaked before I was born. Jeez, man. The $4.03 an hour rate recorded in January of 1973 had the same purchasing power that $23.68 would have today. And that, of course, is absolutely disastrous. Now, what happened back in the 70s and 80s? Oh, right. In the 80s, Ronald Reagan broke the unions. And before that, the Supreme Court opened up big corporate money in politics thanks to Nixon. So it's not a surprise that when you see gigantic donations from large corporations, corporate entities, coming in and flooding into our politics, that you see a correlation with wages becoming stagnant. It's what we like to call the Great Divergence, and brings me to, of course, one of the best graphs here that we have, Great Divergence. So here you have, in the early 70s, productivity and wages, hourly compensation, breaking, right? Before that, they were right in line. The more productive you are, the more that you end up getting paid. But then you had that split where you had productivity continuing to rise at the same pace as it was before, but wages have flatlined. And of course, there is a reason for that. If this is not an accident, this was on purpose. More corporate money in politics and less union power has created this situation. Now, it turns out that real wages among the lowest paid quarter of workers have increased by just 4.3% since 2000, making the lowest quarter of working class Americans worse off, while the top tenth of earners have seen an increase of 15.7%, that's about $2,112 a week, compared to an increase of just $26 each week for the bottom 10%. $2,112 a week in your paycheck compared to $26. And of course, all of this in the same time period, you have, according to Bloomberg, the cost of college, tuitions and fees increasing by 1,120%. Wage growth of 4.3% in that time. And in the same time, college costs skyrocket. But it's not just that. You also have increased housing costs. You have an increase in the cost of gas. You have an increase in the cost of food. You have a massive increase in the cost of health care. This means, basically, that you have an entire population of people, the 90%, that can't actually afford to live in America. Can't afford to live without government help, food stamps, Medicaid, And you have these corporations that exploit that tell their workers, no, we're not gonna pay you more. We're just gonna direct you towards the nearest welfare office to go sign up for food stamps and Medicaid. That is in effect a subsidy to these employers, the McDonald's, the Walmart. I remember when McDonald's released their chart on how to budget. They included a second job, no heat, and incredibly affordable insurance. Insurance at a price that most people cannot get. And of course, if you have a pre-existing condition, or of course, if you have family, well, then you're essentially screwed. We live in a country that we cannot afford to actually live in. So how have we been getting by? Credit. The availability of cheap credit, which turns out to not be cheap after all. So yet when you have a credit crisis, and you have a credit bubble, and then you have a student loan bubble, because again, 1,120% increase in college costs. That correlates now with an increase in student loan borrowing, which also correlates with an increase in default rates and student loan debt, which now is in a gigantic bubble that is ready to burst at any point in time. And it could take the entire market down with it. We live in a country where we can't afford to do basic things like get healthcare and get an education. That is a goddamn travesty. These numbers are absolutely disastrous, but this is a reality for so many millions of people, millions of Americans. So, look, here's what we need to do, right? The thing is, we can't live in America. We can't live the American dream, right? But the current administration's solution to this is to shovel more money towards rich people. That's their entire plan. In fact, that was the plan from the outset. All the way back under Nixon. The whole purpose was to make it so that we now, as a country, service rich people. And all the benefits flow to the top. We need to reverse that. Now, how do we do that? Well, maybe we should actually tax rich people. I know, right? Tax them fairly. And use that money, we redistribute that money to the poor and the middle class. The way that the rest of the modern world does. And by that, I mean through things like tuition free at college, right? So public education needs to be tuition free. Another way they do it, through single payer healthcare, where everybody gets covered regardless of how much you make. You are covered, no copays, no deductibles. Another way, higher minimum wage. So all that would definitely help to alleviate this income gap and actually would raise wages past inflation and actually make it so that people can survive. Because as this article notes, despite a few job categories where employers have been compelled by a tight labor market to nudge wages up a little bit, and they barely have. Now, I know some of you might bring up, but did people got bonuses? Some people got bonuses, and actually that basically doesn't amount to a whole lot. And as far as the tax cuts are concerned, look, when you have Paul Ryan out there, Speaker of the House, retweeting a woman who gets an extra $1.50 on her check every week and saying that that's the success of the tax cuts, that's the extent of what we see, well, that is a failure of the system, an absolute disgusting failure. But they say, they continue, this period of low unemployment has yet to improve the situation of average workers from where it was when President Ford was in the White House. Again, that unfortunately is by design. You would think with this low unemployment, they always tell you, oh, no, the labor market See, when the labor market is full of surplus workers and, we don't really have that much demand, of course wages are going to fall a little bit. They're going to stay low because, look, employers have basically their choice, right? Well, now that situation has changed. But wages still won't rise. They're not going to do it on their own. These corporations, the market is not going to fix itself. It's not going to regulate itself, okay? They're not going to choose out of the kindness of their hearts to raise wages significantly. No, what they're going to do is that they're going to take extra money. And this explains why, of course, Wall Street is doing fantastic. It's not because the businesses are doing better. It's not because they're having more demand and hiring more people. No, it's because they've been artificially inflating their own stock. They take the money from the tax cuts and they buy back their own stock and they create a bubble where they actually are not worth more. But then what happens? Well, these companies, these executives cash out because their stock is worth more and they make millions. They make millions. That's what's happening in this economy. It's a fake. It's a false economy. And it's only working for people who are wealthy. That's the reality of the situation. And here's yet another study pointing that out. Is it time for the pitchforks yet? Hey everybody, thanks for watching this video. If you want to see more like this, please hit the subscribe button below. And if you want to support truly independent progressive media, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/TYTNation.